Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Here I am in London at number 50 Clarendon Road, and across the street from me you can see the house where Emmeline Pankhurst lived and her daughter Christabel Pankhurst, some of the rest of the family for many years, well, particularly the run up to the First World War. They did live at another London address in Chelsea, just on the north bank of the River Thames. So we're in the Notting Hill area, a rather chic area. You can see this splendid white building they lived in. So Emmeline Pankhurst, she was born in Manchester. Her husband Richard Pankhurst was a barrister, member of the Liberal Party, a man of very advanced opinions within the Liberal Party, became disappointed with it, and a couple of MPs, Liberal MPs, including John Stuart Mill, in the late 19th century advocated the right to vote for women. So Richard Pankhurst argued this case in court. Some women had attempted to vote in elections in the late 19th century, saying, will I fulfill the requirements? I'm over 21, I'm of sound mind, I'm a householder, it's that kind of thing. I've lived in the constituency over a year, but they're prevented from doing so. And a court ruled that even if a woman satisfied the other criteria for the right to vote, she was personally incapable of doing so. The Representation of the People Act 1832 had said that the right to vote was restricted to male persons. Previously it had been ambiguous, and indeed in the Middle Ages some women had voted because they weren't specifically forbidden from doing so. A tiny proportion of women voted. Back then, of course, most men weren't allowed to vote. Only really in the late 19th century did most men get the right to vote. Anyway, so the family moved down here to London, and Richard Pankhurst died very early in the 20th century, before the movement really got going. So there were suffragettes and there were suffragists. The Women's Social and Political Union was founded by the Pankhursts. It was, run by the family to a very great extent. So Emmeline Pankhurst, she had 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. Now, 3 of her daughters were involved in the campaign. One of them was not. A son was not. One of her daughters moved to Australia. I can't remember why Emmeline Pankhurst got exasperated one of her daughters and more or less ordered her to move to Australia, where she remained a political activist right until the 1950s. So the WSPU was going to be a small, highly disciplined movement, really the spearhead of feminism about this. They wanted morality for men, they wanted restrictions on alcohol and so on. They thought the Contagious Diseases Act was discriminatory. As if a woman was suspected of being a prostitute, she could be arrested, forced to undergo medical treatment, lest she spread these disease amongst men. But men who were suspected of, well, it'd be even male prostitutes, I suppose, but having any diseases, they weren't subjected to such indignities. So she said, we want the vote for women, we want chastity for men. Obviously, intercourse should only be within marriage, she said. She was an ardent Christian as well. So her daughters, Christabel and Sylvia, were very involved in this. There was also the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, which is like an organization of organizations, and they were for women of all 3 major political parties, or for different religious denominations and so on. Now, one of the criticisms leveled at the Pankhursts is that they were upper middle class, they were elitist, they had the time, they belonged to the leisured classes, so that's why they could devote so much effort to campaigning. An ordinary working class woman putting in many hours in a factory or a mill or a farm or something, coming home to look after her half a dozen children, she didn't have the luxury of throwing herself into political activism like this. Anyway, they were willing to break the law, and they in a very minor way. They didn't kill anybody, but like putting weed killer on golf courses or smashing cricket pavilions and things like that, burning various things, and some of them were imprisoned. And they went on hunger strike. They wanted political status, so they the government passed the Prisoners Discharge of Ill Health Act, commonly called the Cat and Mouse Act. So if a prisoner was on hunger strike, he or she could be released and then start eating, and when he or she had regained strength, rearrested, made out to serve the rest of their sentence. So suffragettism or suffragettes, they refused to go away. It was a headache for the government, which just wasn't being cured. and the Labour Party gradually came around to the idea. The Conservative Party somewhat, there were some exceptions to that, the Liberal Party likewise. But on what basis should it be? Should women be allowed to vote but not to stand for Parliament? Or perhaps women ought to be permitted to vote but only over a certain age, only the age of 30, men are voting at 21, or only women with a certain level of education. Not many people envisage complete parity. And some people say this is simply really enfranchise affluent women, or mostly vote Conservative, perhaps a bit Liberal, very, very seldom Labour. And shouldn't we make sure that all men have the right to vote? Because some itinerant labourers didn't have the right to vote in those days. So really the right to vote for all men only came in 1918. But already by 1918 most men could vote. But anyway, so when the First World War broke out, she immediately suspended all her activities. Her newspaper, Women's Dreadnought, she renamed it Britannia, as in that mythic figure who personifies the British Isles. And she threw all her zeal into pro-war activism. Well, she was really vicious and blood-curdling in her anti-German sentiments. So that was that. And some people were anti-war, some socialists in particular. But anyway, so people came around, many other politicians who'd opposed her came around to granting it, saying, well, women should have responsible they are, they've earned the right to vote. It became less humiliating to withdraw your opposition. It was no longer a loss of face, like Marquis Curzon of Kedleston, for instance. So April 1918, there was another Representation of the People Act, and part of that was granting women the right to vote, but only the age of 30, if they're either a householder or married to a householder. Men could vote at the age of 21. It was only in 1928 that women were allowed to vote on an equal footing with men. Previously, the government said we don't want flappers being allowed to vote. Flappers as in young women who were superficial, who just cared about frippery. So that was her. But in the late 1920s, she became a Conservative, stood for Parliament as a Conservative, get elected, and involved in some Christian fundamentalist movements, spent a long time in the United States, died in 1928. So one of her daughters, Christabel, became a Conservative as well, and the other one, Sylvia, became a socialist. Sylvia lived with her Italian paramour. They had a child. This is outraged Emmeline, who never spoke to her daughter again. Christabel became a hardline Conservative. Some people even say a fascist. Lived on to 1958. So that is the Pankhurst family, who really are absolutely scintillating. They're willing to suffer for their beliefs, going to prison occasionally. And that was that. If they hadn't done that, women wouldn't have got the right to vote for considerable time after this. New Zealand had already granted women the right to vote in 1892. Several states in the US had done so. Sweden had done so. Denmark had done so, and so on. All right, so that is enough about the Pankhursts.